This sound is iconic. The UH-1, or better known as the Huey, was a piece of technology designed during the Vietnam War. It was more than just a helicopter. It was everything for these soldiers. For them, seeing it meant a chance to make it back home. Join us as we dive deep into how this legendary aircraft shaped the Vietnam battlefield and left an unforgettable mark on history. The story of the Huey helicopter began back in the 1950s. The U.S. Army needed a reliable helicopter that could transport troops and supplies, handle rescues, and even offer medical evacuation. The Vietnam War, with its dense jungles and rugged terrain, made it clear that traditional vehicles wouldn't cut it. That's when Bell Helicopter developed the UH-1, later known as the Huey. It's designed to be fast, powerful, and able to carry heavy loads. The Huey became the first helicopter of its kind widely used by the U.S. military. In Vietnam, it served as both a weapon and a lifeline, bringing soldiers to and from the front lines, evacuating the wounded, and supporting ground troops in ways it's never seen before. By the end of the war, the Huey became more than just a machine. It had become a symbol of the courage and resilience of those who served. And what not a better way to learn more about the Huey helicopter and its impact on the Vietnam War than to travel out to the Liberty Warbirds Association located at Lancaster Airport in PA. The Liberty Warbirds Association is a non-profit organization that's mission is to educate the public on the Huey's impact during the Vietnam War. They also honor those who have served and restored and fly the aircraft to let the people experience its impact. There, I met two individuals, David Jones, the Director of Maintenance, Quality Assurance Supervisor, and Martin Kleiner, a proud LWBA member and Vietnam veteran. Together, they both shared the history of the Huey and a more in-depth look into what the Vietnam War was like.
Following the Korean War, the Army decided they need a dedicated medical evacuation helicopter. And so the UH-1 that we see here in the pictures and the descriptions was designed to perform that medical evacuation mission, where you could get more of the wounded out in an enclosed environment and not riding out on the skids. When it came into the service, and also it was the first turbine helicopter that the Army purchased, the others were reciprocating engines. So when it came into service, it was realized that it could perform multiple functions. And as we got more and more involved in Vietnam, the roles and functions of the helicopter really expanded. I served 2 tours in Vietnam. First one was from January to June of 1969. I would have been there for a full year, but I got wounded after about 6 months, and I was actually picked up I was out in the field with an infantry unit, picked up by a medical evacuation helicopter, flown to the hospital, and then from there I was in the hospital about 2 weeks in Vietnam, then went to Japan for about a month, and then back to the States. On my second tour, I was a rather senior. I was 24 years old on that tour.
Oh, you see, you're 24?
Yes, and a captain. So I ended up flying the command and control, the controlling aircraft, being in charge of the missions as opposed to flying the gunships that were part of the mission. That this aircraft is not an armored aircraft per se. You could basically go through and punch a hole in it anywhere with a screwdriver. Certainly bullets would go through there.
It's hollow.
It is, and very thin sheet metal. We do have some armor protection for the pilots and the crew members. So the pilots have an armored seat. There's an armored plate beneath it, armored sides, and then this panel would come forward prior to you taking off. All right, so the first thing we do before we start the aircraft is we make sure that we've got our seatbelt and shoulder harness on and adjusted. So you basically have 4 points and goes through, and the seatbelt locks it in place. We make sure we can move forward, and then we've got a lock on the side that we can put on if we're coming in to land in a combat situation. But you got to understand, as you're coming into a landing zone with troops on board, people are shooting at you. And you want to make sure, you know, if one of the pilots gets shot, that you don't actually fall into the controls and make it hard for the other pilot to actually maneuver the controls. We wear flight helmets. People say, well, are they bulletproof? And the answer is no, they're not. They are for crash protection and sound attenuation. You have 3 primary flight controls. You have this It's called the cyclic. This allows you to move the aircraft left, right, forward, and rear by adjusting the pitch at a point in the rotation. In order to increase the overall lift and make the aircraft go up, you have this, which is called the collective pitch adjustment. And you pull up on this, it increases the pitch in the blades. And as the pitch increases, you get more lift and the aircraft comes up. But because the rotor is turning in one direction, the fuselage wants to turn in the other direction. So you have to control the nose of the aircraft with these pedals on the floor, which adjusts the anti-torque rotor in the rear, the tail rotor. And you don't muscle these controls around. There is a hydraulic assist on them, so it's like having power steering in a car where they move, very easily. But once you get out there and you're flying a mission, particularly a combat mission, all of this has to be instinctive. And you're not thinking about any, you're flying the aircraft basically without thinking about flying the aircraft.
Why is the positioned the main pilot on the right instead of the left?
So the main pilot in a helicopter is on the right. You've got your primary flight instruments here. You've got these same controls over on the other side, but you can't start the engine from over there, and you don't have the flight instruments. However, in combat in Vietnam, the aircraft commander / pilot in command normally sat in that seat because you have better visibility of the ground. You don't have the full instrument panel sitting right in front of you. When we would come in to insert the troops in, we would be in a tight formation and we would start a descent, and you would have 10 to 12 aircraft flying very close together, and you would be coming in, descending at 1,500 feet per minute. And then when you got down close to the ground, you would have to put the aircraft into what we call a flare to slow down that rate of descent, get down on the ground, the troops would get out, and you wanted to try and be off the ground within about 20 to 25 seconds. Here I am carrying 2.75-inch rockets out to load into the rocket pods that you see on the side of the aircraft.
How heavy were those rockets?
So about 35 pounds.
Some nights you might not even sleep because you just fear that something like an attack could happen. Does that keep you up sometimes?
Well, it does. I mean, I was petrified. Because you realize that there's a fair chance that you might die or get seriously wounded. And that's not something that you can live with. And you basically come to the realization that, I may die, I may not, but there's nothing that I can do about that. And then all of a sudden that fear kind of seems to dissipate. And then you can really start performing.
This is our radio compartment. We have our battery. All the radios and all the instruments are all back in here. So we start with inspection, checking all these lines, checking all things hooked up and everything else. If you see an empty slot, it's because the radio is no longer installed in the aircraft, but they would be in Vietnam.
What type of radios we're talking?
VHF, very high frequency, UHF, ultra high frequency, FM, frequency modulation, and then some instruments for security. The unit was the 170th. They were the Flying Dragons, and it had a red bikini and a blue bikini, again, because they felt as naked as a woman in a bikini in the LZs. So they adapted bikini red and bikini blue as their sign. And he signed his name right here, but you really can't see that. So we made him sign it here. So this is painted by Russ Mowry, who was the Bikini 170, was his call sign. He was aircraft commander of this aircraft in Vietnam.
Oh, wow.
Between 67, it says 68, 69 is when he was painted. So he painted all the nose on this aircraft in Vietnam. He heard we had the aircraft, he painted the nose again. So we like to brag, we're the only people I know that have the original artwork by the original artist painted on the same aircraft in 2 different countries. If you want to see where one bullet hole is, there's one bullet hole right here in the aircraft.
Can you tell me the story on that?
It came up through the pilot's legs, through the chin bulb, and hit the aircraft here. Nothing got hit on the inside. This is a T-53 L-13 engine.
Wow.
It's
very complicated.
Very complicated, but you're talking 1950s technology. So the engines now are smaller, more powerful, and less movable parts. This was designed for power. They needed to have enough power to fly in the highlands and the lowlands of Vietnam and do the mission. So you'll see a lot of aircraft flying that don't have this door, and some of the pilot's doors are moved for weight. It took that much weight off so they can carry that many more rounds, that many more people. Inside here is a 42-degree gearbox. So what it does, it turns my angle 42 degrees towards my tail rotor and steps it up, higher speed. I have a 90-degree gearbox up there that sends the shaft out to turn the rotor. This is a tail stinger. What this does is it keeps me, when I'm coming in hot, from hitting that tail rotor. That's all this does, is protect my tail rotor. This inside here is where my oil cooler is, my tail rotor servo, which makes my tail rotor move up and, in and out, and a heater mixer. But if you also look in here, you'll see a bolt here, a bolt here, a bolt there. 4 bolts hold that tail boom on. My office is right in here. Either side, crew chief on one side, gunner on the other. Crew chief's usually on the left side because that's where you can see the tail rotor at. The gunner's on this side, and the gun mounts here, and here there's a gun mount that sits here, and an M60 machine gun sits on top of this. And there's a couple of bags of rounds, and we collect the brass so the brass doesn't go where. If I'm flying and I'm firing, my brass is going that way. Yeah. It's going to hit my tail rotor. Oh, yeah. So we have a bag that gathers the brass. Has an extra barrel back here and an asbestos glove because the M60 gets so hot that the barrel turns cherry. Barrel get half cherry, take it off. But the whole purpose of this weapon was not a defensive weapon. It was mainly an offensive weapon to keep the heads down of the enemy when the aircraft is going into the LZ to drop the guys off.
This is amazing, but I can't get my eye off of Kermit. What's the story behind that?
There's a good story on Kermit the Frog. My other crew chief is very skinny, and when he wears a flight suit, he's green. So he got the moniker Kermit when he was flying in Germany. So Kermit's been on every one of our flights as he's kind of our mascot. But Kermit has an ability to use his hands. So if it's a really good flight, the crew chief does say that to Kermit. The pilot gets out of the aircraft and he looks back to, hey, chief, good flight. How'd I do? Pretty good. Do you need any help? If it's a bad flight, Kermit covers his eyes. So the pilot gets out of the aircraft and goes, all right, chief, what did I do? How can I help you? And we're like, no, I got it. You did this, you did that. If it's a really bad flight, Kermit has the ability to cover everything. So the pilot gets out of the aircraft and goes, oh, chief, I will meet you at the club because I don't even want to know what I did to your aircraft today. That's the story on Kermit.
And with that, the thrilling adventure comes to an end. I would like to give a special thanks to Martin and Dave, along with the Liberty Warbirds Association for their time and cooperation. If you would like to learn more about their story and mission, visit libertywarbirds.com or check out their Facebook page, Liberty Warbirds Association. Thank you to our veterans and for their service and sacrifice. Happy Veterans Day.